Has Jeffrey Epstein or P. Diddy ever walked up to you and offered you a lollipop? Well, they sure as shit haven't for me, but I do know something that has been offering my mind something. And that something happens to be the question of what on earth this snake shed skin actually is and its significance to Elden Ring. And to be honest, with all this information, everything makes a shitload more sense, not to mention making everything so much more tragic. It's been a very long last few days, so if there's any discrepancies in the video, I really am sorry. Without any more dilly-dallying, please sit back, relax, grab some succulent, juicy, tender, and absolutely bloody sensational prawns if you want, as we delve into this snake shed skin, its connection to Eagle, and so much more. To start this video off, I need to explain to you that I 100% believe that the snake shed skin outside of Bonnie Village is in fact Eagle. Going further on to this, I want to talk about the size of the snake shed skin outside of Bonnie Village and how it can tell us how big the snake or Eagle might have been at this point in time. It's really hard to actually measure a snake's shed skin because as it comes off it stretches to 20 to 30% larger than it actually is. And considering the snake's shed skin is actually about a third of the tarnished height, it's going to be quite a lot smaller. And that sort of gives you a little idea of how big this snake was at the time. Something that further connects these two snakes is actually their skin sheds. If you look at their heads, you'll actually notice they're virtually identical. The only difference being the one inside the Eagle Church seems to be a lot older and a lot bigger. If I had to guess, I'd probably say about 2 times bigger than the one we see outside Bonnie Village. But then again, like I said, judging a snake's size by its shed isn't the most reliable source of measurement. But considering we don't actually have a measurement for the actual snake at these time periods, it's the best we can really do. Further information can actually be ascertained by the shed skin. If you look at the shed skin, you might have noticed that it's all patchy. There's holes and bits missing and some bits are scrunched up. This is what people call a bad shed in snakes. Basically when the environment isn't right, whether that be the humidity, the heat, basically everything that dictates the environment of the enclosure. If that's not right, if that's not what it's meant to be for the species, then they can have these bad sheds. That is exactly what seems to have happened with the Eagle Church snake and the one outside of Bonnie Village. They look like they're not from this land, and I wager it has something to do with what we're going to talk about in a minute. But before we go on to that, I also want to say that I'm deadly sure that the Eagle Chapel snake, the one outside of Bonnie Village, and the God-devouring serpent are all one and the same. I know that's been a theory for a long time, but something that further proves this is the fact there's actually stuck shed on Rykod's snake inside of his boss fight. This is all without mentioning that the head of the God-devouring serpent is also almost identical, except for being a lot bigger than the ones we see in the snake shed skins of both Bonnie Village and the Eagle Chapel. Now that we've linked all 3 of these snake occurrences, something you may be wondering is, if it's not native to these lands, then where is it from? Well, we know the Newmans are denizens of another world, and there's actually some information that suggests that this snake, Eagle, is from where the Newmans are from. If you go to the Cerulean coast, you'll find what item descriptions call coffins, but to me they look more like ships. They've got all the shippy parts to them, and yet they're called coffins. The only thing that I can think of is that they were used as ships, but on their long expedition they resigned themselves to the fate that perhaps they'd die, and so they called them coffins. That to me sounds like the most logical explanation. Upon these ships you'll actually strangely find snakes inscribed all along them, along with birds, but that's another topic for another video. We are never told how the Newman, or by proxy the shaman, gained access to the lands between and the lands of shadow. I think it's very highly likely that this is how they got there, that they used these ships to arrive at this world. Now when it says they're denizens from another world, it's not necessarily saying they're from another world. Using our geography, we can really surmise that the lands between the lands of shadow and their collective map are not the only places inside Elden Ring's world. For example, we hear of all sorts of stuff beyond the fog, and I believe Marika and her people are no different. Except to the people of that land, it would look like they were denizens from another world. Something that further connects the snakes and Marika's people, the Newman and the shaman, would have to be Mesmer. He has abyssal serpents, which surprisingly look kind of like Eagle, though I'm not saying Eagle and the Abyssal Serpents are the same thing. I'm just saying there's definitely, in my opinion, a connection there. Now, if there is a connection, then that means Eagle is in some part related to the shaman. And I think the answer to how is that maybe they brought them along. What if, upon these arcs, upon these ships, they brought along some animals, one of such being these snakes? If you want to go further down this rabbit hole, you could also make the argument that perhaps these abyssal snakes and these snakes were symbols of the outer god of their age, of their land. Perhaps the outer god of a snake, the abyssal serpent, and what it represents was in fact their outer god. That's a bit on the more speculatory side, but I also do think it's a possibility, and I do genuinely believe that Marika and her people brought this snake culture over to the lands between the lands of Shadow. Before we go any further, I did just want to say, if you are enjoying the video, only if you're enjoying, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Without any further ado, I'll let you get back to the video. With any good character, there's always a good motivation. There's always a reason behind whatever they do. And I don't think Eagle is any exception to this. I think the answer actually lies in where we find the first shed. We find the first shed just outside of Bonnie Village, going away from Bonnie Village. Bonnie Village being the place where the Hornsent tortured and made these amalgamation creatures we know now as the jars. These jars were filled to the brim with shaman or Newman, which is, as we've just talked about, possibly connected to the snakes and by proxy Eagle. Considering the small size, the connection to the shaman, and the fact he's going away from the Bonnie Village, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that when these shaman were taken to become saints, perhaps Eagle was taken with them. Perhaps the Hornsent had some special plans for him, turning a snake into a human-snake hybrid, just like we eventually see inside the lands between Rykard. Let me pose you a question. If you were kidnapped, kept in these dark and dungy and cold dungeons, would you seek out your former cellmates and try and bring them peace? The answer to that question really depends on the situation, and I think in Eagle's situation, his childlike naivety led to him thinking the best idea was to rid the world of those that were saints. There's been a theory for a long time now that Marika was one of these jar saints, and while I wasn't ever particularly the biggest fan of this theory, I think it makes a lot more sense now considering this. To my knowledge, the term saint is actually a mistranslation. It's very possible, in my opinion, that the term saint could be referring to something a lot more divine, and considering all the failed attempts at making saints from these jars, perhaps Marika was one of them that succeeded in a new method where she then became a god. You might be thinking, what on earth has this got to do with Eagle? Well, Eagle is the god-devouring serpent. The god-devouring serpent. It isn't talking about Rykard. Rykard's a demigod. This implies a full-fledged god. In my opinion, the reasoning for him devouring gods is making a lot more sense now. When he's consuming these gods, he's seeing them as his cellmates. He's seeing it as perhaps putting them out of their misery. This is a lot of speculation, but I think it makes a lot of sense considering everything we've talked about in today's video. While Lay's egging over everyone, another question arises. Who was helping him? And I think I know the answer to this too. We know that the Godskin nobles and the Glowmite Queen performed god hunts where they killed and slew gods. Can't be just me who thinks that is very, very similar in sound. If the Glowmite Queen and her army and Eagle are connected, it brings up a question of just what their relationship was. And don't get any bad ideas, you dirty bastard. I'm talking about just in a platonic way. What alliances did they have? And perhaps what motivations did they both share in common? And I really hate doing it in these videos, but I really am stumped. There just isn't enough information to come to a conclusion on what their mutual motivations were. I wish I could, but if I did, it would just be me spitballing and coming up with stuff that I think could be the case, but didn't have much backing, and I don't want to do that to you all. Something I can tell you about, though, that I am 100% certain about to do with the Glowmite Queen and Eagle is something interesting I actually noticed when I was using the photo mode. if you look on Rykard's hand, and if you look on his sword, the blasphemous blade, which by the way basically means snake blade because the blasphemous part is from the snake, you'll notice this pendant. This pendant is eerily similar as to what is upon the Godskin Nobles' cloaks. Now that we've established there's a connection between the Godskin Nobles and Eagle, the fact their pendant is just there is to me definitive proof. Although as always I could be wrong, and I definitely am curious to see what you all have to say. Just a quick note as well, the serpent's minion, which says it's an unwanted offspring of a serpent ritual, looks eerily similar to the man serpents we see inside Volcano Manor, and it's located underneath Eagle's shed skin. This topic of unwanted offsprings is very similar to what Melania does, birthing children she didn't mean to birth. Melania is a god. If that godly essence gives that ability, then maybe, just maybe, the god-devouring serpent in of itself is one of the successful saints. Although I know that's probably the most speculatory part of the video, but I just wanted to throw that out there for you all to listen to. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. I really hope you did enjoy this one. I really enjoyed making it, although I've got to say, it was such a hassle because I accidentally deleted the wrong Final Cut folder and I used an extension called Clean My Mac and it completely deleted all the backup files. So that was a hassle. This is the second time I've had to fully record the video, so I hope it did turn out semi alright. Anyway, I'm not going to hold you any longer. I really do hope you have a great rest of your day. Don't you dare go hollow, friends, and may you find your worth in the waking world. Goodbye everyone.